when you look at, for example, a state like Texas that said no to the Common Core, but from reading your book and really diving into it and getting pushback from people that I thought were allies, and to see what they're pushing legislatively in education, you begin to understand the coordination and that Texas didn't need to pass the Common Core national standards because we were part of the beginning of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, you were. Texas was part of what was called the New Standards Project back in the 1990s, and in fact, the National Commission on Education and the Economy, Texas was such a big part of this, the Texas Education Agency, that they had a branch office in Austin. Doesn't that make you feel good? Yeah, I would. Are you kidding me? And basically, the Common Core is a restatement or a renaming of what was called the New Standards Project back in the 1990s. And what the New Standards Project was always missing were the performance assessments. So what you had as part of the 2009 Stimulus Act, one of the first things done when President Obama came into office was funding these new kinds of assessments. So basically, that's what got put into place. And most of y'all, the Atlanta cheating scandal, the convictions have been within the last week, and the sentencing of a lot of the teachers. Atlanta was part of the New Standards Project. They had to cheat because they didn't have the assessments they needed to cover up the change in emphasis. So this New Standards Project is not an isolated matter, and Texas was a very big part of that. So yeah, you didn't need the Common Core, and plus Texas not participating, and Virginia not participating, which also didn't particularly need to go along with the standards given what was already going on in the state. It made it sound like some states were going their own way, and
so it actually helped the narrative.
It helped the narrative, exactly, and it kind of lulled people to sleep. Another thing that Texas is actively involved in is competency-based education, and the Reinventing Schools Coalition is very much involved with a lot of Texas schools.
One of the things that I want to talk about, this shift away from academics, where we're testing children on knowledge. Do they read well, write well, do math, do they know history, where you can test them on knowledge, to this shift to an equity-based education that assesses and looks at attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. And what we've talked about and what I've come to understand after reading your work is that when we talk about attitudes, values, and beliefs, we're not talking about social issues, right-left issues. We're talking about changing children's behaviors and worldview. And talk a little bit about that, Robin, and then I want to bring in Joan to talk about what the real impact is psychologically on our children when you shift to this. And one of the things that you pointed out to me, Robin, that I think is so interesting is the big opt-out to opt out of these terrible, Park and Smarter Balance. But what that's bringing in, our children are being assessed by the activities that they're doing, and they're being monitored daily. Is that correct? Am I on track with that?
Yeah, heightening all of the summative, what they call summative assessments, summative tests, is hastening where they wanted to go all along, which is formative assessment, where the activity, the assessment is the activity, and it's embedded in the classwork, and basically the student isn't really aware that they're being assessed. It's being done by computer, and engaging in the activity. And one of the things they like to do is, they're trying to guide perception. So it's not that you want the students to understand the world as it is. You want the student to perceive the world as it could be. And you don't particularly want them to have a deep factual knowledge so that they go, that won't work, and immediately recognize it. You want the students to be willing to act to change the world as it is and to reimagine the world as it might be, which when your assessment is basically a software program that has been created so that you're kind of visually immersed in this imaginary world that was created to cause you to believe that the world might be a different way. You can see how useful that would be. I want to make one quick point because it's one of those nerdy things that a lawyer is likely to catch, and it really matters. In the new federal legislation, they mandate that it can't be about knowledge anymore. And it's a really tricky thing that they do in the language. And I'm going to give the page number because otherwise you would easily miss it. But if you go on to page 28 of the Act, it says that the state has to have adopted challenging academic content standards. Well, that sounds nice. And then the next statement is, and aligned academic achievement standards. So what they basically are doing is saying in the next line, and you've got to specify how everyone can meet these academic content standards. Well, if everyone has to meet it and you've specified in advance, you've basically, I read that and immediately said, that has to be behavioral. But then they finish up and say that the academic content standards and the aligned academic achievement standards are now defined for the rest of the statute as challenging state academic standards. So if you don't pay attention to precisely what that language said in that paragraph, you'll miss that forever and ever and ever they have specified that these standards have to have the alignment of how you're going to meet them that's part of it. So I did a little bit of tweaking on that, and I discovered over and over again that aligned academic achievement standards comes out of the idea of alternative assessments for the kids who have academic difficulty. So that's where that language came from. And then if you go a little bit further, as I said, they incorporate the universal, on page 40, they expressly say that all the states have to use the principles of universal design for learning. And, I laid out in the book how alarming that is and how that basically guts traditional academics. It's on pages 286 to 288 of the book. Well, now we are incorporating it into federal law as applicable to every state, every student, period. And this is such an important point to them that the universal design for learning has to be incorporated. Comes up again when they're talking about the pilot state, the innovative one that basically refers to what's already going on in New Hampshire. And then later on, there's some stuff about a new kind of literacy that actually sounds a lot like whole language. But beside the point, you get into that, and the new literacy instruction expressly incorporates universal design for learning. So this statute, if you read it and understand universal design for learning and understand what it takes for all students to meet it, is saying it can't be about the transmission of knowledge anymore, because that doesn't meet the criteria that have been written into the statute. So apart from all of our, and there's a lot of language in there about non-academics, there's a lot of language in there about the positive behavior interventions and support. All of the things that we have worried so much about in either the book or on the blog over the last number of years, they're incorporated into this statute as being where all of education everywhere has to be going to. So this is a horrific statute that fundamentally changes the nature of not just American education, but under these parameters, this changes what America is and can be and who our children can become to a shocking degree. And for it to be in a 600-page federal statute that Congress is planning to adopt in a bipartisan manner, all I can think of is I better not see anybody who voted for this ever have an American flag pin on their lapel, because they will have gutted what it means to be this country if they pass this.
You know, we've got all these other issues, immigration, national security, all these things. But if this happens to our children without, and that's one of the things that when in your book, when you talk about the Turchenko model, that Turchenko says that, you know, when this is implemented, people will not even know that it's happening, because you will do, the people who are implementing this have access to our children and will implement it, and we're not supposed to know it.
There's all sorts of language in there about coming up with reports for parents, and it'll be easy to digest language. It'll be easy to mislead the parents. They will have no idea what student achievement actually means. But what it actually means is perfectly clear under the language of this statute, if you read carefully. And it's clearly, it was designed to mislead. It requires that talked a little bit about what higher order thinking skills actually means and higher order understanding, deep learning. It specifies that every state's assessment has to be assessing for higher order thinking skills. That's not about facts. That's not traditional knowledge. It's what concepts and strategies do you apply when there is no right answer, when it's not clear cut, which is, as we've talked about before, is a behavioral, highly useful behavioral information about somebody, is what they do when there is no right answer, because you pretty much know what they're going to do in everyday life when nobody's looking, because these are the concepts that they bring into play. This is what guides how they see the world. This is what guides how they respond to situations. And that's precisely the information these assessments are gathering. And if the information that they gather is not what somebody wants, they have curricula and learning activities already set up in something that's called the Learning Registry that the Department of Education has created that could be downloaded, that will fit a student with those personal characteristics, and that have worked to create the desired change in a student with equivalent personal characteristics like socioeconomic level, gender, minority situation, whatever. And so this is a shocking change in who we are. And when I wrote the book, I'm so glad I wrote the book, because it would be impossible to fully appreciate this statute if I had not walked through all the things that I laid out there. But I had no idea so much would be coming so fast and all at the same time.
It is. It's frightening, and it's frightening to see it. But then when you look at Joan, where you are, and you look at the kids in the schools and how this will impact them, not even just changing what our country looks like, but the real psychological implication to our children and what this will do to them. Can you, Joan, now that you've heard what Robin has said, I would love to know your take on this, and in understanding what's happening with this reauthorization of ESEA and No Child Left Behind. What is the real impact, the everyday impact on young children in the classroom?
Yeah, I think the points that Robin has elucidated is really sobering at the least and terrifying at the worst. Everything that she said I would heartily agree with. I think she has her finger on the pulse of this much more than virtually anybody I know. And I would also agree with this idea that it is being done behind the backs of parents. It's very subtle. And it is not anything that is being presented in a forthright manner. And so parents aren't prepared. And one of the ways that I'm seeing the impacts, I think it impacts the children. And then I also think it impacts the family. And I'm not sure if people are quite understanding that secondary effect. And then, of course, it will affect the community and nation, which was what Robin was asserting, too. As far as the children are concerned, when we have a behavioral component, we have behavioral and attitudinal and values goals incorporated into the standards, then the child has to be coerced in some level, either gently or more overtly. But the coercion will come because the standard is there. And Robin's done a very good job of helping us all understand that words mean things. And when we have a government that's standing behind those words, then we say words mean things, and if they're not complied with, then the consequences will be dire. And so these children will be like helpless guinea pigs in the system, where the adults and the force of government are steamrolling over their little hearts and their little minds. This is, I think, a tragedy on that individual scale, because children, we know that children are individuals, and I love that Robin is standing up for that value of the individual. Children are individuals. They need to be taught and nurtured as individuals, and that's why the family unit is a brilliant way to rear children, because especially when we have mom and dad and possibly some extended family, you have those individual needs taken care of by people who love and care for that child, and there's no ulterior motive. Now, in something like a school situation, the progressives and liberals love this because we have large groups of children who are supervised by non-relatives. These people, bless their hearts, they're doing the best they can, but if they don't have the picture that for instance, Robin has presented, then they will kind of go along unthinkingly and become this coercive arm of government and arm of tyranny with our precious children. So some of the ways that this happens is just having this idea that one of the values is to collaborate. Now, collaboration sounds really lovely, but in point of fact, what collaboration means is that the group will decide what the truth is, and any individuals who lift their heads to complain or to object will be summarily slapped down. And that's what collaboration means for all intents and purposes. So it trains children from a very young age to go along with the group, to be very easily swayed by the group, and it relinquishes their individuality from a very young age. Now, everyone knows with developmental psychology that if you can have a child until about the ages of 7 or 8, you pretty much have molded their worldview, or at least their interior worldview. That means who they think they are, what their capacities are. And it will stay fairly fixed throughout life unless there's some intense re-education, counseling, or a religious conversion or something of that nature. So the liberals and progressives get that. They're all about the preschool, early child intervention, pre-K, and elementary type of, those types of interventions at a very early age. So these children will feel like they are kind of helpless before this this entity or this feeling that they must go along to get along. And if they don't go along to get along, they will suffer the consequences. And the positive behavioral interventions and supports, the PBIS, it sounds so nice. It just sounds so positive. But what it's teaching is this groupthink and this group coercion, and it's really a wolf in sheep's clothing. So just as far as the autonomy of the individual, it's absolutely deadly. And progressives and liberals understand that, and that's why they want it. They really don't want to educate a free-thinking mind and in the creative spirit and the type of person who will stand up and say, no way, I'm not going to do it. I will not conform. That is their worst nightmare, is a number of people who will do that. And so that's their goal.